Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us tonight and welcome to our Make the Most of Your College Experience series. Tonight's session is on financial aid and scholarships. My name is Kelly Blount and I'm the Program Marketing Specialist here at General Electric Credit Union. We're excited to serve the families and individuals of our communities through this 5-session series in partnership with Xavier University and Xavier Leadership Center to help you learn a little more about the college process and what to expect directly from professional career and collegiate experts at Xavier University. And today's session, Financial Aid and Scholarships, is led by Mike Garcia, Assistant Director of Xavier University's Office of Admissions. Mike, thank you for being with us today and for sharing your insight and wisdom. With that, I'd like to pass it over to Mike Garcia.
Thank you so much. First, I just want to say thank you all for tuning in tonight to talk a little bit about financial aid and scholarships. This is actually really one of my favorite topics to talk about because it's something that I think needs a little bit of demystifying. It's one of the most intimidating parts of the college admissions process, I think. But once you have the info and the facts and you have some baseline with this, it can really help ease the college search process and ease the financial aid and scholarship process and the search for that as well. So let's jump right in. So tonight we're going to start off talking about the philosophy behind financial aid, and by philosophy I mean the philosophy of the U.S. Department of Education. We're going to talk a little bit about cost of attendance, what actually goes into what you're paying for in college, sources of aid, different forms of aid that students can receive, how to apply for aid, the FSA ID, the FAFSA ID is what that is, and then additional places where you can find help. Now, first, let's talk about philosophy behind financial aid. When we talk about philosophy, we're talking about how the U.S. Department of Education views paying for college. And they really view it as a twofold process, or really a partnership between parents and students, that it is not just a student's responsibility to pay for college, and it is also not just the parent's responsibility to pay for college. It really is a partnership. So, of course, for students, there are student loans, there's work-study programs, there's merit scholarships, there's private scholarships, institutional scholarship. For parents, there's the Parent Plus loan, which we'll talk a little bit about later, and of course, different savings plans that parents might have, but it is a partnership. Second, that students cannot cover full needs. So when we're talking about full need, we're talking about that balance, the balance after merit aid has been applied and the balance after any need-based aid has been applied as well. That's something that, again, is also a partnership between parents and students. Additionally, a student's ability to pay for their educational costs, those have to be evaluated in an equitable and consistent manner. And what we mean by that is that there isn't preferential treatment when it comes to need-based aid for families. So, for example, just because a student is the son or daughter of a celebrity, they don't get preferential treatment when it comes to how much money they can receive for aid. Same thing goes for legacy students. That's what it means when the Department of Education talks about fair and equitable and consistent manner. The second point here, the second bullet point, is kind of an interesting one, that families should be evaluated in their present financial condition. That one's a little bit tricky, because by present financial condition, it means the present financial condition that the U.S. Department of Education and the IRS can see. So, for example, for incoming students, if you are a senior this year or you have a child who is a senior this year, they're going to be starting in the fall of 2022, this coming August. Well, when we're talking about need-based aid and evaluating families for aid and students for their eligibility for aid, the U.S. Department of Education actually pulls tax return information to look at a family's eligibility. Now, for a student who's applying for college to start in the fall of 2022, the only full year of taxes that the government has is the 2020 tax year, because you will be doing your 2021 taxes in a few months from now. So, when we say present financial condition, they mean the condition of what finances were in the 2020 tax year. So keep that in mind. It's a little bit tricky, but it's the full year of income that the Department of Education and the IRS has from you. And lastly, that special circumstances can be considered. Some of you may have heard of special circumstances before, but Basically, what that means is that if a student is evaluated for aid, they receive a merit scholarship, and then they might be eligible for some need-based aid, or maybe they're not eligible for need-based aid. But say something changes since the 2020 tax year, especially in the time of COVID, we know that things change. Sometimes there's job loss in a family. Sometimes there's divorce, and God forbid a family member passes. In those cases, family income can really. So most universities have a special circumstance process that goes through their Department of Financial Aid, their financial aid office. And that's where you can submit some documents and say, here's what my aid was in the last tax year, but here's how it's changed. Keep in mind, though, that to be approved for such special circumstance changes for more need-based aid, it has to be a pretty significant amount of dollar amount in terms of what finances have changed in the past year. So keep that in mind. It's usually for large changes in income and for extreme circumstances like job loss or divorce. Now let's talk a little bit about what goes into the cost of attendance for a school. We're going to talk about sticker price before we jump into merit scholarships and need-based aid. So when we're talking about what you're actually paying for and the overall cost that you see on a university's website, we're talking about the cost of attendance before any sort of aid. The first thing that people are paying for, that students are paying for, of course, is tuition. And tuition covers the cost of classes, right? But there's also going to be fees associated with most universities. And when we're talking about fees, we're talking about nothing too large. We're usually talking about things like some universities have a student orientation fee for the middle of the summer. Many schools have orientation in the summertime when students can register for classes and come to campus and basically prep for their first year. There might be a fee associated with that. Most universities actually have student activities fees. That's actually pretty common to help pay for clubs on campus and student activities for them. Some universities have a green fee. That's actually something that's newer that you're seeing at universities, and those support sustainability initiatives on campus. But when you see fees, that's typically what we're talking about. Additionally, there's room and board. So if a student is commuting from home, that's one thing. But if a student decides to live on campus, then they will be paying for room and board. So that's talking about the residence hall. That's talking about the dorm. In addition to that, there's a meal plan. That's where we talk about board. And this can vary depending on the university and depending on what they offer. So at some universities, all of the housing is the same price for first-year students. It's sort of similar to that at Xavier. Most of the residence halls for first-year students are pretty much the same cost. At other universities, they might offer apartments for first-year students. They might offer suites. They might offer double rooms or triple rooms where a student might have two other roommates in the same room. All of those forms of housing might have different fees associated with them. So keep that in mind when you're budgeting for college and you're looking at costs, is that they may vary depending on the type of meal plan and the type of room that a student may be dorming in. And other expenses to also keep in mind that are really important. First is books. At Xavier, we estimate that overall in the US, and for most college students who are attending college full time, they spend about $1,400 on average for books per year. So that's a good amount of money. That's a good chunk of change. So that's something you're going to want to factor into your budgeting. One thing I will say is it can really vary depending on a student's major. So for example, an engineering student will have a lot of books that may be very pricey. Some of their books may be over $200 just for one textbook. For an English student, it may actually be a lot cheaper for their books if it's something that you can find at a local bookstore, for example. But books can vary. At some universities, though, they do have book programs where they will actually give students a stipend for books, or they will even pay for books. That's something newer that's coming around. At Xavier, for example, we actually provide books for students. They don't have to go around searching for books. They don't have to buy their books. They don't have to worry about getting them shipped in. They actually are there when they arrive on day one. So that's actually something that's becoming more and more common. But just remember, if a school doesn't have a program like that, then you should factor in about $1,400 for books when you're budgeting. Supplies to anticipate are things like, of course, supplies just to go to class, right? So pens, pencils, that type of thing. But in addition to that, say a student has a biology lab or a chemistry lab. There's a good chance that that chemistry lab may require goggles, for example, safety goggles for that class. Things like that. If a student is a nursing student, they may need to buy scrubs. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about supplies. And then transportation is getting to and from school, before school, at the end of the school year, as well as during breaks. Most universities do ask students to leave campus during their winter break. That's quite common, actually. And this is actually one that I think I always tell students to think a little bit about in terms of where they go to school, because sometimes it can actually surprise families how affordable it can be to go to school further away. Now, what I mean by that is, so I'm an admission counselor. I'm assistant director of admissions at Xavier. That means I also talk to students and recruit students to come to Xavier. And one of the territories I've recruited in the past is California. Originally from California, but when I used to fly out to San Jose and to San Diego to talk to students about a Xavier education, the round trip ticket to those cities was oftentimes cheaper than going to another city in the Midwest, than flying to another Midwest city, because those are airport hubs. So just because a university is further away does not necessarily mean that it's going to be more expensive to get there. A lot of times families are actually quite surprised when they look at schools in other parts of the country, especially because here in the city of Cincinnati in northern Kentucky, this airport is a hub. So tickets can actually be quite affordable to other cities across the US. So just something to keep in mind. All right, now let's talk a little bit about expected family contribution. So expected family contribution is a number that the Department of Education comes up with after a family fills out the FAFSA. So after the FAFSA is all filled out and the Department of Education reviews it, it will look at expenses for that family, what the income is, and it will deduct expenses. So the Department of Education knows that families need to pay a mortgage or rent. They know that there's car payments. They know, based on how many students there are in the family, how many children there are in the family, that there may be other students going to college, for example. All of those costs are estimated and then deducted from a family's income. And after that, that leftover dollar amount is what the government calls expected family contribution. That's the amount that the Department of Education and a university says that a family can put towards their education. Now, as we all know, that number can be a little bit deceiving at times. We know that families have different expenses, but it is something that is calculated by the Department of Education, and every family will receive an expected family contribution dollar amount, which is shared with universities, and it is the same dollar amount for every university. So let's look at this chart really fast, and I can just demonstrate what I mean by this. So for a student who's applying to college A, let's say this college, the cost of attendance is $40,000, and the expected family contribution for this family is $10,000. The government estimates that this family can put $10,000 towards this student's education. That means that there is a financial need of $30,000. So that's the need for this particular school. However, if a student is applying to a university that has a cost of $20,000, the expected family contribution is still $10,000, but the financial need changes. Their need in this case goes down to $10,000 because the school only costs $20,000. And then in this third case here for college C, if the university costs $10,000 to attend and the family's expected family contribution is $10,000, then they have zero financial need. There is no financial need for that family. At least that is how the university and the Department of Education view it. Of course, we know that every dollar counts and that there are ways to receive more aid, and we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. But I wanted you to see this so that you understand how the government estimates the expected family contribution and what that means when it comes to financial need. Now, there are four major sources of aid for students to fund their education. First are scholarships. Now, in terms of terminology, when we hear the word scholarships, we are typically talking about something that's academics based, something that's merit based, and these are funds that don't need to be repaid. Scholarships are something that is money to put towards college. You don't have to pay anybody back after that. When we're talking about financial aid, that oftentimes refers to not just scholarships, but also financial needs. So if you hear About financial aid packages, for example, those will typically incorporate financial need if a family has filled out the FAFSA, which we'll talk about in just a second. But just keep that in mind, financial aid and scholarships, two different things when universities are talking about that and using that terminology. There's also grants. That is also money that you don't have to pay back. We like grants. And those are typically need-based, based on family income, or talent-based. And then there's loans, of course. There are student loans as well as loans that can be in a parent's name to go towards funding their student's education. Loans must be repaid. And then there are work opportunities like work study. Many of you have probably heard the term work study. Well, work study is actually a need-based federal program. Students qualify for work study through the FAFSA based on household income. But if a student is not work study, it doesn't mean they can't have a job on a university campus. It just means that the funds are not coming from the Department of Education in that case. They're typically coming from the university that the student is going to and working at. But for the student, typically a work study job versus a university job, a non-need-based job, a lot of times it looks very similar on the student end in terms of how many hours they work and how they get paid. And usually work study opportunities are paid every 2 weeks or once a month based on hourly wages. So it's not something that students will get and in bulk or as a chunk of money to go towards education. It's typically something that's built up based on hours worked. Now, let's talk first about scholarships. So again, these are based off of merit. They're based off of academic achievements. Sometimes they're based off of interest. A lot of times there are, if you search online, you might find scholarships for students who are interested in actuarial science, or students who are interested in nursing, or students who are interested in a particular area of study. Or maybe they did Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts. That might be something that there are scholarships for. Scholarships don't take into account family income. They don't take that into consideration. Sometimes they do ask you to have filled out the FAFSA if they're coming from a university, though. They want to see the FAFSA if you are applying for competitive scholarships, for example. Merit-based scholarships, when you hear that term, those are typically scholarships that are awarded to students from a particular institution, so from a university. So if you are applying to University A, for example, let's say Xavier University. At Xavier, we have merit scholarships for every single student who's admitted to Xavier. If you are starting as a full-time first-year student, you will receive a merit award, and those are academic-based awards. We do also look at other things like the essay, letter of recommendation, but at the end of the day, those are also merit-based considerations. There are internal awards and there are external awards. So when you hear internal, that means it's coming from the institution, it's coming from the college or university. When you hear external, that's also private. So we're talking about maybe a nonprofit in the city, in your city might have scholarships. So Cincinnati Scholarship Foundation is a great one. They are a nonprofit that provides scholarships that students can apply to for students here in the city of Cincinnati. Another private one is the one offered by General Electric Credit Union. They have one that we're going to talk about in just a little bit as well. So those are private scholarships. Now, some things to keep in mind with scholarships and some details that you're going to want to keep track of is first, the value of the scholarship. How much is the scholarship worth? How much is it valued at? And are there any restrictions to that? So for example, if a student applies to a university and they receive a merit award, sometimes that merit award is renewable. That means that they'll get that same amount every year that they're in school. Sometimes it's only renewable for 4 years. So say a student ends up staying for a 5th year, they might not be eligible for their merit scholarship if they stay an extra year. Sometimes there's restrictions on the scholarship. So at some universities, if a student has below a 2.5, they may lose their scholarships. That's another thing to keep in mind. Many times scholarships and merit scholarships are academics based even once they're in school. So you're going to want to make sure that you make a note of what these scholarships entail and the details of those scholarships. Now, there's also private scholarship sources that you can look at, you can look for. Like I said, Cincinnati Scholarship Foundation.org is where you can find that. That's a great one. There are some national ones as well that you've probably heard of. Fastweb.com is a very popular one to search for many that are scattered throughout the United States. There are a lot on that website. Collegeboard.com, they issue the SAT for students, that standardized test and AP test, that type of thing. They actually have a list on their own website of scholarships that I would encourage you to look at, scholarships.com. And then a lot of universities actually have their own financial aid websites that have a list of private scholarships that they would recommend students apply to, or private scholarships that their current students have received in the past. So they know that if one student has received a private scholarship from this nonprofit over here, they're going to advertise it because that means another student might be able to as well. So look on college university websites as well. And also talk to your guidance counselor, your college counselor, your college counseling office. They oftentimes are a great source of knowledge when it comes to where you can find external scholarships from universities, for university. Now, let's talk about grants. So grants, I mentioned it earlier, but these are not merit-based. They are typically need-based, so income-based, or they're talent-based. So besides need-based grants like the Pell Grant, you probably heard of the Pell Grant before. That's one that a family would qualify for after filling out the FAFSA based on income. That is one that is offered to students all over the United States. There's another need-based one that is offered to students in the state of Ohio. That's called the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, and that's actually offered to students in other states as well. There's the Teach Grant, which is for students who plan to be educators one day. They're studying to become teachers. The Teach Grant, I will say, has some strings attached to it. For a student to receive the Teach Grant, they do have to fill out the FAFSA, and then they have to apply to the Teach Grant. But if they receive that grant funding, they then agree also to work in a school of the Department of Education's choosing after they graduate for a particular amount of time. If they don't do that, then they may have to pay back the grant in the form of a loan. So keep that in mind when we're talking about the Teach Grants. And then OCOG, that's the Ohio College Opportunity Grant. That's one that's specifically for the state of Ohio. It is state funds from the state of Ohio. There are other grants from different states as well. The state of Kentucky has different grants. They have Keys money. Some of you may have heard of that. That's funds from the Kentucky State Lottery, taxes on the Kentucky State Lottery. They take those that tax money and they put it towards grants for students. So that's one thing as well. But different states have different grants. Then there are talent-based grants. So a student may receive a grant because they are playing a sport, maybe a Division I or Division II sport in college. They may receive a grant for playing that sport. There's also grants for students who are interested in music, performing arts grants, for example, of students who are interested in theater. And many times those grants are actually from institutions, actually from universities that may offer those. And often they will ask a student to come to campus for those. So with the athletic grants, of course, a student is typically recruited for college sports, and then they might receive a grant. It doesn't mean that all students who are recruited will receive a grant. It's different depending on the university, but it's usually for a student who's recruited. And then the performing arts grants are ones where students would come to campus and they would maybe perform a monologue, or they would play a song on the piano, that type of thing. So those are opportunities as well. Now let's talk a little bit about federal loans. So there are federal loans that can go towards paying for college, and there are private loans. So right now we're going to talk about the federal loans. And these are ones that a family would be able to take out if they have filled out the FAFSA. And actually, I'm not sure if I said it earlier. The FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. It is how the Department of Education evaluates a family's income to see if they're eligible for work study. That's a job on campus like we talked about earlier. To see if they're eligible for any grants like the Pell Grant or the Ohio College Opportunity Grant. And it's also going to show their eligibility for loans from the government. Now, every incoming student who's going to be starting their first year in college, if they fill out the FAFSA, they're going to be eligible for $5,500 in student loans to go towards their first year in school. Depending on a family's income, though, some of those funds may be subsidized. So you'll see in this chart right here that up to $3,500 of that $5,500 may actually be subsidized, which means that if you receive the federal direct subsidized loan, then that loan, the interest on it is being paid for by the Department of Education. You're not accruing interest during the time that a student is in school. Interest will start being accrued once a student has left the university after they've graduated. But for an unsubsidized loan, that means that the student is, their interest is being accrued on that loan during the time that a student is in school. No matter whether you receive the 5,500 unsubsidized or if a portion of that is subsidized, there is an interest rate with that, and that is a 3.73% fixed interest rate. Now, that's important. This interest rate will not jump up later on in a student's life when they're paying it off. So if they graduate, 6 months after graduation is when these loans, when bills start being paid on these loans, that interest rate won't jump up the year after that. So that's important. We're going to talk a little bit about private loans. Sometimes those are non-fixed, but just keep that in mind. These are fixed. Each year, a student needs to apply for the FAFSA, and each year they can take out direct student loans. But each year, the fixed rate may differ depending on, maybe different depending on the Department of Education and what they have determined the interest rate should be for that year. There's also the Parent Plus loan. That is a loan that's in a student's parent's name. It's something that is tied to parents' credit. It is approval for it is credit based, and there is a fixed interest rate with that. That is 6.28%. And again, that is something that's in a parent's name, but can eventually be transferred into a student's name after a student graduates, typically through a refinance process. Just like you would refinance for your mortgage, a Parent Plus loan can be refinanced into a student's name, but it would be a private refinance. This wouldn't be something that's done through the government. And the federal direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans, those are in the student's name. So once they graduate college, it will be their responsibility to pay for it, whereas the Parent Plus will initially be the parent's responsibility in their name. It can be transferred later. So here's just a little bit more about the student loans. Again, there is a 6-month post-graduation repayment grace period. So 6 months after a student graduates, that's when they'll get the first bill to start paying for the direct subsidized and possibly the unsubsidized loans if they receive those in student's name. There is also an origination fee for all of these loans. And for the student loans, the direct student loans, it is 1.057%. That is not a fee that goes towards the university. That is goes to the bank that is financing this. This is not something that a university will pocket or anything like that. It's a transactional fee is really what it is at the end of the day. And here are the loan limits for each year. So like I said, for an incoming first-year student starting their first year of college, they can be eligible for up to $5,500 in student loans that can go towards their tuition and room and board if they're living on campus. Sophomore year, it goes up just a little bit. They can be eligible for $6,500. Junior and senior year, it's $7,500 for each of those years. And the reason why it goes up slightly is because the Department of Education, the government, they know that the cost of tuition can go up and the cost of living expenses can go up, as I'm sure all of you are aware, right? So that's why those increase a little bit each year. And the maximum that a student can currently borrow as an undergraduate student is $31,000. Now, for the Parent Plus loan, it's something that can be, the Parent Plus loan can cover up to the balance of the student's bursar bill. And when we say bursar, we mean the office at the university that is the billing office. They're the ones who send out the bills, right? That's the bursar's office. But basically, the loan can cover everything after aid has been applied. So say the cost of attendance for that university is $40,000, but the student has a merit scholarship of $10,000. So after that $10,000 is taken off, and then say they get some money from the Pell Grant, after that Pell Grant money is taken off that balance, and then they take out the student loans, after that amount, the $5,500 is taken off, that leftover balance can be covered by the Parent Plus loan. So keep that in mind. It can be used to cover up to the rest. So I do tell families, it is the Parent Plus loan is there to help you, but I do think it's really important that parents and students don't take out the full amount of the Parent Plus loan, because those loans can add up really quickly in terms of how much a student and a parent will have to pay back after graduation. So keep that in mind. If a student can contribute with jobs in the summertime, if a student can contribute with more private scholarships that they've applied for, that's a good thing. And if there's any savings to contribute, that's a good thing as well. But parents can borrow up to the full cost minus the aid offered. Repayment is up to 10 years on this, but again, it can be refinanced. And here also there is an origination fee of 4.228%. And again, that doesn't go to the university, that is a transactional fee. Now, there are also private or alternative loans as well. So these are loans that might be offered through a bank. And you probably heard of some of these. And certainly, I think if you're a senior, the parents of a senior or a current senior, you may have talked a little bit to maybe the college counseling office at the high school about types of private and alternative loans. These are loans that are not going to be the direct loans from the Department of Education or the Parent Plus loan. These are ones that you would have to apply for outside of the FAFSA, and typically you would apply directly at the bank and through the bank or whoever is issuing these loans. Keep in mind, they have different numbers when it comes to interest rates. They have different repayment rules that come along with them. So while you saw the numbers from previously, what they were for the direct loans and for the Parent Plus, there might be different with these private loans. Typically, with most private loans, they cannot be taken out in a student's name, in just their name. They typically have to have a co-signer because students are, they're going to be 17, 18 years old. They don't have credit. So that's why there's almost always going to be a co-signer required with that credit check for that student. And when we're talking about dispersal of these loans, when the bank will actually send money to a university's bursar office, it can take a couple weeks. So if you have committed to a university by May 1st and you're getting ready to budget everything out and you want to apply for a private or an alternative loan to pay for college, it's not something that you want to apply for a week before the bills due. You're going to want to do this a couple weeks, if not a couple months before the bills due, because sometimes it can take 2 to 3 weeks for the loan application process and then the school to certify it and to be sent to the school. So you really want to start this process early. Typically, the beginning of May is when I tell families, really, you should start filling out those applications if you decide that you're going to be doing a Parent Plus or a private or alternative loan as well. Now, of course, there are work opportunities, and I mentioned work study earlier. Work study is eligibility through the FAFSA, it is need-based. Hourly pay for work study jobs is typically going to be minimum wage, federal minimum wage or state minimum wage if their state is higher than federal. So we know that Ohio's is increasing this year, so students who are federal work study students, they will be earning an hourly wage that is the new wage that Ohio will be rolling out within the coming year. But keep that in mind, it is hourly. This is not a chunk of money that is set aside for students. It's something that they earn based on their hours. And the Department of Education does ask that students do not work more than 10 hours a week. In terms of the funds that they send to universities, they only send enough funds for 10 hours per week for a student for the full year. And that's, of course, for all of their students, but when universities are budgeting, they want students to stay around that 10-hour mark, and they don't want them to go too much over. One, because we want them to be students first. We want them to learn how to take care of their studies and get a hold of that. But they also want them to keep track of those hours. The Federal Work Study Program through the FAFSA is a use it or lose it program. And what I mean by that is that if a student qualifies for federal work study for their first year in college, but they decide, well, I don't really want a job this first year, so they don't get a work study job in their first year, in their freshman year, then they most likely 95% of the time, they will not qualify for work study the following year or really ever again. So it's a use it or lose it thing. If you qualify for it and you think you'll want to use it, you should take them up on that. It's a good offer. It's a great way for students to make friends and a great way to contribute towards their education as well in terms of funding. But if it's not used in that first year, you most likely will not qualify for it again. And then, of course, there is university employment, non-need based. And most universities will have a student employment office or a student employment website where they can see which jobs might be available. They can work in the student center, for example. There are some universities that have student ambassadors that lead tours. A student could have that as a job as well. But these funds are really coming from the university, and the university will be advertising these jobs. And for both the work study and the university employment and non-work study job, these are jobs that a student still has to apply for. They're not automatically given a job. They typically still have to find the job that they like and send in, maybe a little resume and a reason why they're interested in the job, a cover letter, that type of thing. So brush up on your resume skills, students, and learn about cover letters. That's important. Now, steps for applying for aid. And when we're talking about applying for aid, we're talking about need-based aid. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to submit applications to universities. So if you are a senior this year, you've probably already done this, or you're in the midst of doing this. Most universities, their applications open sometime in August of a student's senior year. I guess the August just prior to a student's senior year, because the common application, Xavier's a common application school, that application opens on August 1st. That's when you can start applying to many different universities across the US, and that's what really starts this process off. After that, you would submit any institutional financial aid forms. So some universities have their own forms that they need a family to fill out to be considered for aid. So one of those types of forms is the CSS profile. You may have heard that before. That's similar to the FAFSA in that it evaluates a family's income and their need-based aid, their eligibility for need-based aid. But it is something that is not through the federal government. It's a university thing. Universities use it, and they use it to evaluate students for that. And not every university will use it. It's somewhat, I won't say that it's uncommon, but it's not the most common thing for a university to have a CSS profile that you're required to fill out. The free application for federal student aid, though, that's the FAFSA. That opens on October 1st of your senior year. That's when you can start filling it out. And if you haven't filled it out yet and you're a current college senior, you can still fill it out. You can absolutely still fill this out. I will say that every student should fill it out. The FAFSA is not there to hurt you. The FAFSA is there to help you. I know that some families can be a little hesitant because they worry about universities maybe seeing what their family income is and how that might affect their merit scholarship. It should not affect your merit scholarship. Many universities will never even see the FAFSA information until after a university has accepted that student, and many times after that student has already received their merit award. In addition to that, you want to fill this out early on in your senior year, because once we get to a certain point in the admission cycle, universities may not be offering as much aid towards the end of the admission cycle as they were in the beginning. So, for example, at many universities, if you apply before February 1st and you have the FAFSA in by February 1st, you will be considered for the most amount of merit and need-based aid possible. But that university may have 2,000 more applications that year than they usually have. And if that's the case, they need to budget their money a little bit more because there might not be as much aid to go around. So after February 1st, there may not be as much aid to go around. So if you apply to that university after that time and you apply to the FAFSA after that time, you may be getting less aid than if you had done it early. So this is not across the board for every university. February 1st is not the date for everyone, but it's something to check with the university about. And if you are a parent of a student who is a junior, or you're a junior or a sophomore or a freshman on this call, you definitely want to go through this application process and file the FAFSA in the fall, just to make sure that you have all your bases covered and that you're eligible for the most merit and need-based aid possible. Now let's talk a little bit about the filling out the FAFSA and how you do that, and what's called the FSA ID. Now, the FSA ID is basically how you get access to the federal government's website, the Department of Education's website and their online systems. It is basically your login for the FAFSA. So when you go to apply for the FAFSA, students will need an FSA ID. They will register for this ID. It is tied to their social security number. It is also tied to their email. And a parent and a student both need an FSA ID. It's not the same for just one family. It is different for the parent. It is different for the student. So keep that in mind. And the reason why it's different is because, say, the parent goes and applies for the Parent Plus later on, after the student applies and does the regular FAFSA, they're going to need the parent's information in that case. That's a parent loan at the end of the day. It's not the student loan. So that's why there's a different one for parents and students. If you have a sibling that's also in college, or if you have another child that's in college, it is a different FSA ID than the one that that student used. So if you've already gone through this process once with your oldest child and they're in college, this is going to be a different ID than the one that your oldest that's currently in college or went to college used. Yours, though, because you're the parent, will stay the same in that case. And parents and students can't use the same email address. It's not just tied to social security number, it's also tied to email address. This is kind of an aside, but a good rule of thumb for families, students, parents is to create a separate email address that's just dedicated to the college admissions process. There's over 3,600 colleges and universities and places where you can get a degree in the US. And I'm sure they're all sending you mail, either in the actual mail through snail mail or by email. So you're probably being inundated right now. That's why it's a good idea to have a separate email address that you can use just for this. For students, many times the main email that they use is the one provided by their high school. The problem with that, though, is that many high schools will delete that email account once a student graduates, or maybe a month after a student graduates. If that's the case, and a student's email for the school that they are applying to and that they end up committing to, if that's the only email that that university has and it gets deactivated in the summertime before the student starts classes, they might not be getting really important information that they need to be aware of. So for example, registration for classes happens in the summertime. A lot of times universities will communicate by email. So that's why you want to use one that is not a high school email address, because those oftentimes do get deleted after students graduate. If you already did that, if you've already applied to universities and used your school's email, it's pretty easy to just call up the university and tell them, here's a different email address. Can you put this one on file because I used my student one? Also below here is the, you can see the website where you can file for your FSA ID. You can also go to FAFSA.gov or studentaid.gov. Really, it's all the same website. It takes you to the same place where you're going to fill out the FAFSA and where you're going to get this FSA ID. You also do not want to give out your FSA ID because it is your legal signature at the end of the day. It is how you are going to say yes to your student loans. It is also how parents are going to apply and say yes for the Parent Plus loan. So nobody should be asking for your FSA ID. That is something that you keep to yourself and should only be used on these .gov websites. Now, for the FAFSA application, I have where you can register there the email, or excuse me, the website address. And again, some things to remember is that October 1st, prior to the year of enrollment, is when you can start filing the FAFSA. For dependent students, they need at least one parent to file also. So say a student, their parents are divorced, the Department of Education needs one of those parents to who they determine is the primary caregiver to file the FAFSA with the student. So regardless of income, what that means is that the primary caregiver is the parent that the student spends more than 50% of their time with. So I know that that can be tricky depending on a family situation, and I get a lot of questions of which parent files with this student. It is the primary caregiver. And if you have any questions about that, the studentaid.gov website actually has info on that where you can actually find out more about how to determine that. The student aid report, that is something that is emailed to every student and parent after they fill out the FAFSA, and it will basically show what the estimated family contribution is, and that's going to be, again, the same estimated family contribution at every university. Doesn't change because it's based on family income. It's not based off of university costs, but you will receive that report after filing the FAFSA. And after you file the FAFSA, there may be more documents that are requested. So if you may have made a mistake on the FAFSA, sometimes it happens. You know, the FAFSA is kind of a confusing process. It can be. A university might notice that and they may flag it, or the Department of Education may flag it for something called verification. And that's basically just a document you have to fill out, and you have to send in your last info from your last year of taxes, basically just to confirm what income is. A lot of times it just means that there may have been a small mistake, or it might mean that you were automatically audited. Sometimes they do audits where there was never a mistake, but they just audit a random group of people every year, and they do it periodically and just to check. So don't be worried if you get flagged for verification. It's something that is a pretty standard process. It just means they need you to confirm family income. Oh, actually, let me go back one. The other documents that you see here, the EC and the MPN. EC stands for the entrance counseling and MPN stands for master promissory note. So loan entrance counseling is something that is actually required by the Department of Education when a student takes out their student direct loans. So if they decide to take out that $5,500 in student loans, or maybe a portion of that $5,500, they are also required then, the student is, to go through loan entrance counseling. It's basically a mini online course to teach students about what loans are and how repayment for that loan works, and help to educate them. It's a good thing that students go through that process. There is also entrance counseling for parents if they are filing the Parent Plus loan as well. And then the master promissory note is basically your what you're going to sign saying, I agree to take out this loan. It is the agreement, the legal agreement documentation that you plan to take out that loan. That is something also that is explained on the student aid website as well as the FAFSA website when you decide to take out those loans. And here are a few tips. There are some organizations out there that may offer financial help to families for a fee, external counseling, that type of thing. If you are thinking about getting more help when it comes to finances in terms of walking you through the process, that type of thing, really, these are things that you can find online for free. You can find really good information on the Department of Education's website. University financial aid offices are also a great place to find this info. Financial aid counselors and college admissions counselors are also there to help you through this process. We know that for a lot of families, this is the first time they're doing this, and it can be really confusing and quite intimidating. So there's no need to pay for a service to help you out or to pay for somebody to help you out. You can find this information for free, and there are resources there to help you. The other great resource is your high school's guidance or college counseling office. Also, colleges, all universities actually have on their websites what's called a net price calculator. It's actually required from the government for a university to have a net price calculator on their website. It might be on their financial aid website, but it is on their website. And basically, it will give you an estimate of college costs. So if you're interested in finding out what a university might cost after merit aid, that type of thing, you can go to any university's website and find that net price calculator, and it should give you more information. Just to start out this process, that's one of the early things that you can do if you're starting out, even if you're a junior, a sophomore, a freshman, or the parents of a junior, sophomore, or freshman. You can go on and experiment with that price calculator on different websites and see what prices are. The FAFSA does need to be filed each year. It is not something that when you file it once that it sticks with you for 4 years. It has to be refiled every year because income changes for families every year. College deadlines, that's another thing that I tell students to pay attention to, because every university has different deadlines for when you need to apply to be considered for the university, to be considered for a particular program, and then also to be considered for their scholarships. And that includes merit scholarships and even their competitive scholarships. When we say competitive, we mean those big scholarships, like the full tuition ones. Oftentimes, there is a date that students need to have applied by to be considered for them. So another reason why you should get this done early in your fall semester of your senior year. And the earlier you get it done, the far less stressed out you'll be second semester of your senior year, trust me. And if you do need to discuss special circumstances with colleges, they can discuss that with you. It is a process of them, you really have to talk about your financial situation, how it's changed. They will ask for documentation, but you are certainly welcome to reach out to a university's financial aid office, and they'd be happy to talk to you about that. And the national deadline to commit to universities, this is all across the US, is May 1st. So use that time wisely. This is really time where you can call up a university's admissions office, where you can talk to your high school guidance counselor's office. We know that the whole college admissions process has gotten downright scary in recent years. I think I said it on the last the last info session that I did, but when I was in school, the guidance counselor picked the few schools that I was going to be applying to, and then I went to one of them. There's so much more that goes into this process now, and it can be a little intimidating. So use that time before May 1st to call up universities and to ask your questions. There are people who are there to help you. I'm one of those people. I work at Xavier, but of course, every university has college admissions counselors. We're here to make the process as smooth as possible. And for more help, I actually just mentioned this, you can go to all those different offices. You can also go to your public library or a college library. That's something that we used to do a lot more when we were applying for college. I know that when I was applying for college and I was looking for scholarships, we used to go to a local bookstore or the library, and there were big books that had a list of all these scholarships throughout the US, and you had to write down the address that you had to send it to, and you had to physically send in a packet. It's still like that, where public libraries and college libraries will have those resources, but now even with the internet, it's even easier to find private scholarships. And my advice to students, and this is something I want you to really take note of, is to apply to one private scholarship a week. College it can be expensive. It's an investment. It is, in my opinion, the best investment a person can make in their future, but it is something that can be expensive. So you want to be able to supplement your college education as much as possible. There are a lot of private scholarships out there, and actually the national trend that we're seeing all across higher ed is that students more and more are not applying for private scholarships anymore. They're relying on merit aid from universities. The fact is that universities can't cover full need. Most of them can't. They can't cover the full cost of attendance. So do your due diligence. And if you're a student, apply to one scholarship a week. It sounds like a lot, but in the age of the internet and Google, it is very easy. It's typically one essay that you've probably already written for your college before, right? You might change it a little bit for each one, but you just upload these documents to different scholarship websites. And I promise it'll get faster and faster, and applying to one a week will probably take you under an hour, if not under 30 minutes to do, and it will benefit you. It will pay off in the end. No scholarship is too small either. So just because a scholarship is only for $100, $500, $1,000, doesn't mean you shouldn't apply for it, because if you apply for one a week that's like that, you may be very likely to receive some of them. So check out those private scholarships as well. In the state of Ohio has their own Department of Higher Education, and they have a great website. So if you go to the site that you see here, ohiohighered.org, you can find out more about the college financial aid process. You can get tips on applying to college for parents, for students. There's a list of scholarships there too. This is a phenomenal website. So I really recommend all students and parents check out this website if you are in the state of Ohio. Even if you're not in the state of Ohio, if you're maybe in northern Kentucky, this is a great website to check out as well. And there's also another website right here, oasfaa.org/FAFSA-help.ho. It provides some really great resources, even video tutorials of how the FAFSA is filled out. It has tips. You can find information on the calendar for the FAFSA. There's workshops that they do. They do some really great stuff. So this is a great place to check out also if you're just starting this process. Even if you're in the middle of this process, check it out. They have some great resources. And here is the Federal Department of Education. You can go to studentaid.gov and start the entire financial aid process when it comes to need-based aid from the Department of Education, from the federal government. Again, that's Cincinnati Scholarship Foundation.org. That every student, if you're in Northern Kentucky or Cincinnati, you should definitely check out this organization. They're a phenomenal nonprofit. They've been very generous to students in the region, and they provide endowed scholarships, many different endowed scholarships, to students just in the Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky region. So I know that when you apply to some of those bigger scholarships on FastWeb and some of the national websites, there could be a lot of people applying to those. Some of them, there could be thousands of students applying. This one, though, it's just students from your region. So you're narrowing the pool of students who are applying, which is why I love this organization. And best of all, it is one application that a student fills out that gets sent to dozens of different scholarships. So highly recommend you check it out. And then there's also the Ohio Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators. They basically are the overarching branch of educators here in Ohio that work in higher ed and financial aid. You can check out their website as well. And if you'd like to reach out to me, I am always here to help. Of course, I promote and talk about Xavier every day, but even if you're not looking at Xavier, I am here to assist you in this process. And this is something I'm really passionate about, and I'd love to answer your questions. So feel free to reach out to me anytime. If you might go to a high school where I'm actually your admission counselor, but if you go to a high school where I'm not your admission counselor, I could also connect you to your admission counselor. So feel free to reach out to me by email or call me up on my phone number. That's my phone number there. I'm always happy to help you out. And that's it for my presentation. I think now it's time for questions. I know that there's been a few in the chat box.
All right. Thanks, Mike, for taking us through this incredibly informative information on financial aid and scholarships. We do have a couple questions from the audience, and I know we're coming up on our time, so I'd like to ask a couple of them if you're okay with that. We're not going to get through all of them, so if I don't ask your question, I'll send it over to Mike after tonight's webinar, get that answer from him, and then send that over to you via email. But is that okay, Mike, if we do a couple questions?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to.
Okay, perfect. So the first one is, when should we expect to hear from FAFSA on what our expected cost is, and when do you apply for special circumstances?
Good question. So after you, so when you fill out the FAFSA, you are also on the last page of the FAFSA going to pick which schools you would like the FAFSA sent to. So universities will only see the FAFSA if you choose to send it to them. And there is a whole search box in the FAFSA application where you can search for the particular schools. The student aid report will come directly to you after you fill out the FAFSA, regardless of which universities you are applying to. But financial aid packages, and that's where the student aid report is, where you'll see the expected family contribution. Financial aid packages, though, are something that is put together by universities, and it is something that they sort of have on their own timelines. Typically, you can expect universities of your senior year, after you've applied to the university and sent in your FAFSA, you can expect a financial aid package. In early spring, January, February is when those financial aid packages are sent out. They will show your merit aid. They will show any need-based aid that you might be eligible for, as well as any other grants that you may have received from that university. Many universities will send it out physical, like a physical package that you'll get in the mail, so look out for it there. But many more are also now doing them online. So Xavier, for example, we have an online student portal for all admitted students, and that's where we post ours. You will also receive a physical one from us. And again, you can expect that certainly by the end of February, but I anticipate it will come out earlier. And that's the same for many universities.
Thank you. The next question is, for a state grant, do you have to be a resident, or are you eligible if you attend the school in the state?
Good question. You have to be a resident. Most state grants are for residents from that state. Yeah, different states might do it differently. I will say I'm not an expert on every state's different financial need grants that they might have, but certainly in the state of Ohio, and in the state of Kentucky, and local states that I know of, you have to have been a resident in that state. Again, because you're paying taxes to that state, that's what makes you eligible for grants, possibly eligible for grants from that state.
And then we'll go ahead and end on this last question. For someone who had relocation income, which was treated as income and included on the EFC calculation, this was a large one-time reimbursement for expenses incurred from the relocation. Can the EFC be adjusted for this or communicated to the college? If so, how should one go about doing so?
So most likely not, because at the end of the day, it was still income. That's how the Department of Education will look at it. And it probably wouldn't qualify for special circumstance, because special circumstance is typically something that's out of a family's control. So changing jobs and starting a new job and receiving aid to help with that, it's actually not something that will be considered in universities. Most universities, special circumstances, but it will still contribute to your estimated family contribution because it was income for that year, unfortunately.
Thank you. So like I said, that was our last question. So that's going to conclude our Q&A session. Mike, I'd like to hand the floor back over to you for any final words.
First, I just want to say thank you so much for tuning in today. I know that this process is an exciting process and you probably have a lot of questions, but certainly feel free to reach out. You have some great resources here at Xavier. We're here to support you. Talk to your high school's guidance office, and certainly the great people at General Electric Credit Union have some great resources for you as well. So tune in for our next session. But thank you so much for tuning in, and happy to have you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mike. And thanks again on behalf of Xavier Leadership Center, Xavier University, and General Electric Credit Union for taking the time to join us tonight and learn with us this evening. We hope you've learned valuable information about the different avenues you can utilize to help ease college experience. Have a great rest of your evening.
Bye, everyone.